Lima Papa Roger, Squawk 1200 radio services. Terminated. Frequency change to Wacky Unicom 135.0 approved. Good day.
Good night, Roger. You can proceed to the runway.
Following the completion of both the Mercury and Gemini missions, NASA's view began to focus outward. Instead of just launching astronauts into low Earth orbit, they turned their sights to the moon. In the year of 1961, NASA began preparations to design new rockets, new command pods, and new spacesuits with the goal of putting the first man on the moon. After an increase in NASA's budget from the US government and full-fledged support from President John F. Kennedy, the Apollo mission soon grew to be the emblem of American engineering and scientific innovation that would stun the world and much more. After Apollo 11's successful return to Earth on July 24, 1969, the Apollo missions would act as a gateway for sending mankind to the moon and beyond. Originally, the idea for the Apollo program was first designed during the presidential administration of Dwight D. Eisenhower as a three-person spacecraft that was supposed to follow the Mercury program, a set of missions that used a one-person spacecraft to launch a man into Earth's upper atmosphere. However, the initiative Eisenhower had created for the Apollo program would later transition to meet the goals of President Kennedy to send a man to the moon by the end of the decade, as he stated in his address to Congress on May 25, 1961, which marked the beginning of the Apollo program. The Apollo program was initially named by NASA manager Abe Silverstein after the Greek god Apollo, the god of sun, light, and music. Silverstein later stated that he named the spacecraft like he would name his baby. Up until the creation of the Apollo program, political tension had been increasing in the US government over the space exploration and missile race competition between the US and the Soviet Union. Senator John F. Kennedy had been a big speaker on the topic of decreasing the gap between the missile capabilities of the USSR and the US, and this was one of the main platforms that would later get him elected as president. During the previous presidential administration, President Eisenhower had let the gap between the Russians and Americans grow when it came to military capabilities and territorial holdings in space. For a majority of the Eisenhower administration, Russian aerospace companies lapsed their American counterparts in almost every scientific field, and this caused much anger among the American people, which allowed for Kennedy's victory in 1960. Shortly after taking office, Kennedy became consumed by the work on multiple projects to overtake the Russians in science, and the Apollo missions will be a part of his goal and a part of his legacy. On April 12, 1961, the Russians launched cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin into space, making them the first country ever to launch a manned mission out of Earth's atmosphere. This event just reinforced the fear among the American populace that they would soon be left behind by the Russians in the era of technological revolution. At an emergency meeting of the U.S. House Committee for Science and Astronautics, one day following Gagarin's flight, many congressmen pledged support for a quote-unquote crash program aimed at ensuring that the United States would catch up to Russia in the space race. President Kennedy was conservative in his response to news sources, refusing to make a commitment on the American response to the Soviet Union. On April 12, 1961, JFK sent a memo to Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, asking for him to look into the present status of the American space program and into other programs that could provide the funding for NASA to catch up to the Soviets in the space race. After a week of research by Johnson and his staff, it was concluded that, unquote, "We are neither making maximum effort nor achieving results necessary if this country is to reach a position of leadership." Johnson's memo thus concluded that having a crewed moon landing will be the closest in the future the United States could likely reach a position of leadership above the Russians. John F. Kennedy would then echo this message in an address to Congress on May 25th of 1961, stating, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth. No single space project in this period will be more impressive to mankind, or more important in the long-range exploration of space, and none will be so difficult or expensive to accomplish." This address would allow for increased funding from Congress and NASA, and the initiative needed by the American people to restore their sense of nationalistic pride. At the time of Kennedy's first proposal, only one American astronaut had flown in space only a month earlier, and NASA had not yet sent an astronaut into low Earth orbit. There were even a group of NASA employees who doubted whether Kennedy's ambitious goals could be met. By 1963, from the stress of the missions and what seemed to be a long time till America was ready to send a man to the moon, Kennedy even considered a joint venture with the USSR to create a United States-Soviet Union moon landing mission to eliminate duplication of effort. With the clear goal of a crewed landing replacing the less challenging goals like space stations and circumlunar flights, NASA decided that in order to make progress quickly, it would rid the feasibility studies designs of Convair, General Electric, and Martin Marietta, and proceed with Phase 8's command and service module design. The mission module was determined to be useful only as an extra room in addition to the command pod and was therefore determined to be unnecessary. NASA would use Phase 8's design as a specification for another competition to manufacturers for spacecraft procurement bids in October 1961. On November 28, 1961, it was announced that North American Aviation had won the contract for the spacecraft for the Apollo program. Although their bid was not rated as good as Martin Marietta's, directors Webb, Dryden, and Robert Siemens chose it out of preference, largely in part due to North American Aviation's longer association with NASA and its predecessor space program. Landing humans on the moon by the end of 1969 required the most sudden burst of creativity, innovation, and the largest commitment of resources ever made by any nation in peacetime. At its peak, the Apollo program would employ 400,000 people and require the support of over 20,000 industrial firms and universities. On July 1, 1960, NASA established the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. The MSFC designed the Heavy-Lift-class Saturn rockets, which would be required for the Apollo missions. It became clear that managing the Apollo program would exceed the capabilities of Robert R. Gilroth's Space Task Group, which oversaw the nation's crewed space program from NASA's Langley Research Center. Thus, Gilroth was given authority to grow the organization into the new NASA Center, the Manned Spacecraft Center. The site for the center was chosen to be in Houston, Texas, on land recently donated by Rice University. NASA Administrator Webb would later announce the conversion of the site on September 19, 1961. It was also clear NASA would soon outgrow its practice of controlling missions from its Cape Canaveral Air Force Station launch facilities in Florida, so a new Mission Control Center would be included in the Manned Spacecraft Center. As September of 1962, by which time 2 astronauts from Project Mercury had already orbited the Earth, Gilroth had moved his organization to a rented space in Houston, and the construction of the MSC facility was underway. Kennedy visited Rice to reiterate the challenge of sending humans to the moon in his famous speech.
But why, some say, the moon? Why choose this as our goal? And they may well ask, why climb the highest mountain? Why, 35 years ago, fly the Atlantic? Why does Rice play Texas? We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win, and the others too.
It soon became clear that the Apollo missions would outgrow the present launch facility in Cape Canaveral, Florida, requiring the construction of multiple new launch sites. 2 sites were already under construction for the usage of the Saturn I and Saturn IB rockets, which were for unmanned test missions. However, even larger complexes would be needed for the manned missions and the use of the Saturn V rocket. The Saturn V rockets used in the Apollo missions and the moon landing were a 3-stage rocket that would stand 363 feet tall and have a diameter of 33 feet. The original Saturn V rocket would have a lunar payload of 96,800 pounds. Its capability would later grow to 103,600 pounds for advanced lunar missions. The Saturn V rocket was given the AS-500 series number as its designation, with the AS standing for Apollo Saturn and the 500 representing the 5 for the Saturn V rocket. After much trial and error with the rocket and recruitment of multiple astronauts for the mission, the Apollo program was ready to launch its first manned mission entitled Apollo 1, a name chosen by astronauts Roger Chaffee, Virgil Grisham, and Ed White II. Sadly, during a test to simulate the launch countdown of the spacecraft, a group of technological failures resulted in a cabin fire, which would engulf both the pod and the launch complex with flames, preventing a rescue mission from taking place. All 3 astronauts suffered fatality due to asphyxiation or the lack of oxygen in their spacesuits on January 27th of 1967. Immediately following the accident, NASA convened an accident review board, overseen by both houses of Congress. As a result of the finding within the Accident Review Board, Administrator Webb removed Harrison Storms as a Command Module Program Manager. Webb also reassigned Apollo Spacecraft Program Office Manager Joseph Francis Shea, replacing him with George Lowe. To correct the causes of the fire, multiple changes were made to the Block II spacesuit and operational procedures of the spacecraft, the most important of which were the new uses of nitrogen-oxygen mixture instead of pure oxygen before and during launch, and removable of flammable cabin and spacesuit materials. After the improvements made to the command pod and the Saturn V rocket itself, the Apollo program began to move at an exponential rate, with multiple unmanned flights conducted under the mission names Apollo 4, Apollo 5, and Apollo 6. The objective of these missions were to conduct the first test flight of the Saturn V rocket, conduct an Earth orbital test, and an uncrewed mission to conduct a mock translunar injection, and a direct return aboard using SM engines. On October 11, 1968, the first crew Apollo mission took off. The mission title was Apollo 7, manned by the astronauts Wally Schirra, Walt Cunningham, and Don Isley. This would mark the point in which the Apollo missions would become much closer to the lunar surface than ever before. After the completion of Apollo 8 and 9, the world was ready for a lunar landing, but NASA wanted one more test to ensure success. On May 18th of 1969, Apollo 10 rocketed out of Cape Canaveral into space, with a course set for the moon. The objective of this mission was to fly the launch module 50,000 feet above the lunar surface to select a landing spot for Apollo 11. To ensure that astronauts Thomas Strafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan didn't go against the commands of Mission Control, the administration purposely gave them too little fuel to land on the lunar surface and then return to Earth. Apollo 10 would return successfully to Earth on May 26, 8 days after the launch, providing necessary insight for Apollo 11. On July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched using a Saturn V rocket entitled Eagle for the launch landing profiles and a CSM-107 command and service module entitled Columbia. Astronaut Neil Armstrong was the mission commander for Apollo 11, with Michael Collins as the command module pilot and Buzz Aldrin as a lunar module pilot. At 17:54 hours Coordinated Universal Time on July 24, 1969, the Apollo 11 lunar module completed its landing profile to the lunar surface.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Astronaut Neil Armstrong was the first to step foot on the moon. During his first steps is when he said his famous words, "One small step for man, one giant leap for mankind." Pilot Buzz Aldrin followed, making the second human and man to step on the moon. After 21 hours and 36 minutes of research, exploration, and photography, the lunar module would ascend from the Sea of Tranquility and meet up with Columbia for the return to Earth. Apollo 11 will return to Earth on July 24th. The Apollo program will continue for 3 more years with the conclusion of the program on December 19, 1972, with return of Apollo 17. $25.4 billion later, the Apollo program marked a turning point in not only the space race, but the exploration of the stars. Well, that's it for today's video. We thank you for making it this far into the video and for watching. If you enjoyed what you saw today, please consider liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and turning on post notifications by clicking the bell. If you want to follow our channel on other platforms, you can use our Twitter and Instagram handles on the screen here or link below. If you want to join the community, you can join the Forward Aviation Discord channel, where we talk about future videos, insights into the aviation world, and updates of our channel. Thank you for joining us today. We hope you fly with us here again soon on Forward Aviation.